Republican Party. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell is criticizing the Republican National Committee for approving a resolution that described the Capitol riot as legitimate political discourse. McConnell says the Capitol Hill riot was a, quote, violent insurrection intended to stop the peaceful transfer of power. He also went on to say the RNC should stop criticizing party members who are investigating the events of January 6th. Last week, the GOP voted to censure Wyoming's Liz Cheney and Illinois' Adam Kinzinger for serving on the House Select Committee investigating the Capitol attack. Joining us now to talk more about the investigation into the Capitol attack is contributing writer for New York Times Magazine, Robert Draper. Robert, thank you very much for joining us.
My pleasure.
A lot to get to, but first I'd like to quickly touch on the RNC censure resolution and the divide it's creating within the Republican Party. What does the response to that resolution say about the former president's hold on the party and its willingness to protect him?
Well, it shows that that hold is quite strong because, in truth, the division is really not that great at all. The sum total of elected Republican officials who have objected to the censure resolution of Liz Cheney and Adam Kinzinger is really basically as much or as less as the number of individuals who voted to impeach. Now, you referenced Minority Leader McConnell's remarks, and it's true that he's criticized the censure resolution, but he has also voiced support for the RNC chair, Ronna McDaniel. And it's clear that he's trying to calibrate a way for Republicans to take back the House and the Senate in 2022. As McConnell well knows, a lot of these senators are going to face a litmus test from the right. They're going to have to say something that expresses sympathy for Trump and in all likelihood have to say something about whether or not the election was legitimate, and the majority of Republican voters believe it was not.
So turning now to the January 6th investigation itself, the House Select Committee is adopting techniques more commonly used in criminal cases than in congressional inquiries. How could this approach help them obtain more records and perhaps break through the stonewalling by former President Trump and his allies?
Well, we'll see how effective it is. It's pretty clear to me that it's born out of two realities. The first of them is that there were, in fact, crimes committed, attested to by the fact that there have been something like 730 federal indictments thus far relating to crimes alleged to have been committed at the Capitol on January the 6th. But the other more pressing reason is the time is not on the side of the Democrats. They know full well that a year from now, if the Republicans take back the House majority, the first thing probable Speaker Kevin McCarthy will do is disband the committee. So they're going to have to assert more aggressive techniques. Whether they work any better than before remains to be seen. It's certainly clear that Liz Cheney and Jamie Raskin are the ones who are really in charge of this committee, though titularly it's Benny Thompson, and that they are throwing themselves into it as if it were their political legacies. So the aggressiveness owes as much to those calculations as well as to the force of personality of those two individuals.
And Robert, former New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani told the New York Times he warned then President Trump that imposing martial law to overturn the 2020 election would land the president and his aides in prison. So this report said the plan was suggested by former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, as well as former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell. What can you tell us about that? And how could Giuliani's statements here influence the January 6th investigation?
Sure. That actually came from a story that I wrote for the New York Times Magazine about General Michael Flynn. And the person who told me that was Overstock CEO Patrick Byrne. Byrne told me that Giuliani had said to him that the reason that they rejected the military option, the reason that Giuliani advised the president not to go that route was that, quote, we would all end up in prison if that happened. Now, let's stipulate two things. First, that it's a strange day in America when Rudy Giuliani emerges as the voice of reason. But secondly, let's also not fit him for a Congressional Medal of Honor just yet, because it is true that Giuliani was advising the president on a number of potentially extra-legal ways to overturn the 2020 election results. He was just shying away from the one tactic that he believed could land them all on the slammer.
Yeah, Robert, your piece on Michael Flynn was sort of really eye-opening. Did Flynn respond to any of that? I mean, he's still on the road, essentially preaching a lot of what was in your article. Has there been any evolution to his point of view?
No, there's been none, and I mean generally the statements that he has made have always been encompassing ones about the fake news media, about the fact that the election, the supposed fact in his view that the election was stolen, so in the ecosystem that's inhabited by Mike Flynn, there's no real potential nor any real profit in his view to any kind of back and forth with the mainstream media.
And last week, former Vice President Mike Pence did reject former President Trump's claims that he had the right to overturn the election. Some people say he should have said more about it, but of course this comes ahead of the National Archives and Records Administration releasing Pence's records next month to the House Select Committee. So what do you expect we are going to learn from those documents, and what could it mean for the former president and his allies? How concerned should they be, even after these reports that we hear that the president and his allies destroyed many documents?
Yeah, right. I mean, certainly that's got to be one reason why the release of the Pence documents is so important, because we know that the vice president, or we expect that he did not shred documents the way President Trump did. The documents could tell us a lot about the particular angle of the pressure exerted on then Vice President Pence to essentially assert authority that he did not have in overturning the election results. And I think it could teach us whether or not not only what Trump and Chief of Staff Mark Meadows said and did with Pence, but also what other members of Congress, particularly in the House Freedom Caucus, did with Pence. What they'll also probably show us is how little Pence knew about other areas. I doubt very seriously that Pence was involved in any discussions about strong-arming state and local officials, about using the military option to seize voting machines that we were discussing earlier regarding Mike Flynn. So I think that Pence was cut out of a lot of things, and we therefore shouldn't expect too much in terms of like this all-encompassing view of efforts made to overturn 2020 by looking at the Pence documents.
Robert Draper, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you, Robert.